content is becoming a bigger and bigger differentiator for companies. We see huge differences, like 4x in some cases, between kind of average content and really good content.
My critique of agencies for a long time is that it's all about the creative. It's all about the ideas. And you can see this, like when you see an ad or you see a creative thing, it just misses the mark. And you're just like, what were they thinking when they did that? You have to find a partner who understands like your business objectives first, understands the audiences, uses creative as a tool to reach your business goals.
This is Between Two Pixels, the podcast for anyone who wants to reach and connect with their audience through content and marketing.
Welcome to another episode of Between Two Pixels podcast. My name's Josh, and I'm here with my business partner, Brian Owen. Brian, how you doing?
Hey Josh, great. How are you?
I'm doing great. That was so official.
Well, I feel official today.
That's great.
I got a business shirt on. I'm like ready to go.
You are. You like to wear t-shirts.
Well, yeah. I mean,
keep it cash.
I have some clothes just in case I have a surprise appointment.
Yeah, Brian likes to wear t-shirts to work. I'm gonna air your dirty laundry, but
it's all actually clean.
It's all clean. He has like an ottoman full of like nice shirts for me.
Yeah, wrinkle free, obviously.
I love it.
They can withstand the punishment.
100%. I love it. So today we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of outsourcing content production. So this is going to be a good topic, I think, for people who maybe, they're marketing directors on a team, or maybe they own their own business, or, really, I'd say organizations of any size, to kind of talk about how you either decide to build an internal team or maybe take the production of content outside. And obviously, what are the pros and cons of both? So jumping into that topic, what would you say are some of the general things that we should consider as we're going to start talking about this?
I think it's important just because, content is becoming a bigger and bigger differentiator for companies. And what we're finding is because there's so much content, there's a big difference in the effectiveness of content, right? So we're seeing, no matter how you measure it, whether it's awareness, introducing yourself to customers, or influencing what they kind of think, feel, and do, we see huge differences, like 4x in some cases, between kind of average content and really good content. And in terms of like converting people, getting them to respond and do things. So a lot of money is being spent on content, and so we got to make sure that it's being spent well. And it doesn't mean to give it all to an agency. I think we both feel, and I've been in a position where I've hired agencies in a former life and know what's like really frustrating about that experience. And I think we've tried to carry that into what we do, but it's not always a thing where it's just, just find a good agency partner and trust them with it. It's not a hands-off thing. And so I think it's important, because to do it right, you're spending a lot of money on it. And so you want to leverage that investment and make sure you're doing it, kind of like the right way. Right. So,
yeah. So, as we're kind of jumping into it, I was making some notes, and I felt like there were 3 ways to approach this when you're looking at, content production. So you can either build an internal team. You can, let that also, with an internal team comes the infrastructure of an internal team. Well, I want to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of each, but I'll just lay them all out. But build an internal team, hire and manage contractors. You could like find the best contractors for each of your individual projects, and then, kind of be the general contractor as it would be in like a construction thing, or hire an agency partner and just find like an agency of record, or maybe a handful of agency partners. I mean, that's probably even another option, is just like build a network of agencies that do different things, but they're not contractors. Kind of almost the same as contractors, but I kind of felt like there's those 3 things. So how do you feel about that? Is that accurate, do you think? Or?
Yeah, those are the 3 primary options. And just another point is, when we're talking about content, we're not just talking about video. Obviously, video is usually the most complicated to create. So oftentimes content creation discussions come to video because it's more complicated. But it's writing, it's copywriting, it's still imagery, it's all of the content that goes typically on the internet, but also some content that ends up in physical places as well, because that still is an issue. So it's, having people write, produce video content, all of any and all of that, right, is kind of part of that. But but typically, there's a couple different models. You're going to have it all in-house. You're going to have it all out of the house, right? Outsourced. Not out-house, not in and out-house.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Not in-house and out-house.
Yeah, we're looking at the difference between in-house versus out-housing.
You don't want to out-house your content. Outsourcing your content, or a hybrid where your kind of internal team is doing some of it. There's obviously some participation at any level, right? If you're going to outsource your content, you still have to participate and provide the direction that your partner needs. So it's not like it's completely hands off. But in a lot of cases, there might be like a marketer who just hands it over to the production company. They do everything. That's one model. But a lot of kind of flavors of the hybrid approach, where you do a little bit of it and then you work with agency partners. I think the most complicated and risky is potentially just to outsource it to a whole bunch of agencies, and they'll have their specialized skills, because that's a really hard thing to manage. So, but we can get into that.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of building an internal team when it comes to content productions, because this kind of fits into the bigger discussion. Because if you're gonna talk about the cons of outsourcing it, well, then you've got to look at, well, what are you going to do in the alternative? Yeah. So we'll just start with that. So the things that kind of come to my mind, and to kind of back up some of the things that you're saying, is that we actually work with our clients and partners that in each one of these models. And so depending on the size of their company, it's like they might have a very big team that has very specific needs, a bigger corporation, and they're going to have maybe an internal team in some capacity. I have other clients we do some special projects for. They have a full internal team because they're more, I would say it's just like a more tailored approach to like their brand or whatever that is. And then we have clients that do use that contractor model here and there, but then we definitely have some, that obviously use us as an agency partner, but then also kind of mirror that with like an internal team in some capacity, but in various ways, because depending on their size, right? So I think it's really important to say, like, with the clients that we've worked with, they use all three. So it's not that one's bad. It just means that like you got to do what's right for your organization and your size and your team. So anyway, so for the first one, building the internal team, I think one of the cons is obviously the cost, because we have a client that we've worked with for years that we do all of their event production, and our team travels all around the U.S. We'll probably highlight them in an episode at some point. And the cost of bringing that internal, I'm not even sure that they could do it for less than what we do it for as an agency partner, because of the efficiencies we get from the infrastructure that we have of like just storing all of the content, building the teams, the software, the equipment. We get to share that expense across like all of our other projects. Well, they would have to. And I think they've recognized that like over the years. There was discussions about bringing it inside. And the more we've talked to them, they're more like, no, let's just go ahead and sign another 2-year deal and keep it going. So I think that's one of the things. That's just from a sheer cost perspective. Building a team, cost, I would say salaries are becoming in the creative spaces, they're becoming more and more competitive, especially in the video side of things. I feel like web and design has gotten more competitive. Web took a real big jump, like maybe 8-10 years ago, when it became more of like building technology infrastructures and platforms. As you know, it's like the cost of hiring like a really great web developer can be an investment. But I think that same thing is kind of happening on the creative side. So it can be just the cost of salaries and benefits and creating a great work environment. So we kind of take that on for our clients. So maybe you could talk a little bit about one of the points I have in here, which is working in a vacuum, because you're kind of talking about this, like you end up maybe not having enough outside input if you try to do this internally. Yeah.
So I have a little firsthand experience too. So the team that I led a while ago was, I think there were anywhere between 12 and 15 people as a creative services department that served a bunch of different brands within a bigger corporation. And there was certainly an attractiveness to like, well, we can bring in a team and save. I mean, it was like, why would we pay $150 an hour when we can bring in and the salaries don't even compare to that, right? And so it worked in some cases, but that was one of the things that we realized that we need to go outside for, was because our whole team was really insulated from a lot that was going on outside of our industry, because everybody's, I mean, even as our designers, we're in meetings all the time. So it was like, we were really craving ideas and like, what are you doing in healthcare that you can take into hospitality, or what's going on in the tech sector that you help this startup with that could really help get some innovation to our like older stodgy brand, right? So I think that's part of it. And then just realizing all of the different skill sets required. So for instance, you might have, we had a video editor who could also do some graphics, right? It's tempting to use that person then to do like all your graphics, but then you're really limited in some of the stuff you can do from like an animation standpoint. So it was one of those things where you start to realize how many different skill sets you need, and some of them are very specialized. And so we kind of got to the point where the work we had to create obviously had to fit within the skill sets that we had. And so we had to kind of start bringing and supplementing the staff with people from the outside who could bring in 3D animation or a specific style of writing, right? If we're doing something that needs comedy, we need someone that can do that. So, or even just specialized social media, like really understanding those platforms and channels. Sure, you can assign that to somebody internally and they can kind of learn it, but they're not going to be nearly as efficient as somebody who does that all the time and can bring in those new ideas. So, so yeah, that kind of fits into the category of, depending on how innovative you need to be, that's where outsourcing some of that stuff can bring in a new perspective. And I think that's what a lot of our clients value, is that like, we're bringing in ideas from other industries that somehow we can figure out a way to make them apply. Right. So,
which that really brings up a good point, which I don't know if we touched on at the beginning, but when we're talking about content, we got to talk about where that content's going to go.
Yeah.
And like, what channel is it being delivered on? So, obviously in a corporate space, you could be producing content for internally, you could be producing content for like a sales team, or like B2B. Maybe there's some B2C stuff and it's ads or whatever. Well, okay. Well, if you're just going to produce that and it's going to live online, or you're going to run a TV ad, well, social is a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
And so really, when you're talking about content production, you're also talking about the right format, the right strategy, and all that stuff. So you got to ask that question, like, can we come up with, even if you don't come up with a strategy, can we execute it internally? Do we know the best way to do that? So I think that's really important, which leads us to the second one. So the second option being, okay, well, if you're not just going to build a full internal team, maybe you have someone who is, maybe worked outside in an outside agency, and you're going to hire that person on to be your marketing director or whatever, creative director or whatever, and they can manage a bunch of contractors. So you probably could save a little bit of money doing that. I would say that person needs to be really good at managing the brand in that case. And then, of course, for me, I think one of the big cons is you could end up with inconsistency.
Yeah.
And probably inconsistency in like managing your budget, because if something misses the mark, you have to like potentially redo it, or whatever that is. You've got deadlines, you've got all this stuff, so it's kind of a risky thing. So what are your thoughts on that? How could someone do that well, or how have you seen it done well, or do you feel like it's just nothing but disaster ahead?
It is hard, and I think you hit on the biggest point, is the inconsistency, because one of the challenges if you outsource, is one of the benefits of having an internal team do your content is that they know your brand really, really well. So they kind of start to speak on behalf of the brand, and they kind of understand like how to represent the brand visually and all that, right? So that's an internal thing. So if you're bringing in contractors, they can be really, really good at what they do, but it doesn't mean that the work they produce is good for your brand, if that makes sense, right? So like objectively, you could be like, that's great, but it's inconsistent with the way that you present the brand, right?
Well, yeah, and it's even inconsistent with work you might get from other contractors.
Exactly, yeah. So that is the hardest thing, and I'm trying to think of like examples where I've seen this exact model work really, really well. I mean, it certainly can, But you're right. You have to have a person who holds that all together. And one of the downsides is if that person isn't there forever, then you're like, okay, we need to find an exact replica of that person because they've got to hold all this stuff together, right? And so you're looking at like, who did this work? Well, let's get their files from them, and they have turnover. It just becomes a mess. So you can potentially save money because every hour that's being spent is being spent on work, but that work is, you're going to have a lot of stuff you have to redo and kind of make sure that everything is cohesive from a brand standpoint. And we know from research that the consistency of the brand matters, right, for customers to know what to expect and that they can kind of trust that the brand delivers consistently on what they promise. And so if you have different ways of representing the brand promise, it gets confusing, and then the customer no longer knows why you're different or better than others, right? So it is complicated.
Yeah, I know. And before Between Pixels was formed, and I was doing contract work on my own for a while, when I would get an opportunity to work with a bigger brand who did use this model, they usually had like a very, sometimes they did and sometimes they didn't. Depending on the size of the brand, they would give you a very comprehensive brand guide, and not always, they did at the time. I mean, this was 10, 12 years ago. It wasn't 10 years ago since we've been around longer than that, but I would say 12, 13 years ago. Video wasn't really part of the discussion for like, for brand guides and whatnot. It has become more, but they would just be like, here's our brand guide usage for print, and just try to follow it. Yeah. So it was kind of all over the place. You would see people's stuff, treatments of the graphics and all that stuff. It just was like, yeah, this isn't great. I think that's probably been remedied a little bit, but then like I said, you have to have a really great brand manager to be like, this is exactly what this needs to be, and to keep all of those contractors on track to be like, we don't do it that way, we do it this way. And you got to have a really good brand guide. Yeah. So
that's a good point. I think visually is one thing. What we found is it's the nuances of the language that we use. I mean, it takes us a long time to really understand how to speak on behalf correctly of, like, it takes a while to understand that. And so that's, you'll see whether it's like headlines or any kind of copy, especially longer form content. And it just is like, that doesn't sound like it's from the brand. Right. And same thing. And so I think certain things are even harder to learn. And so once you understand the messaging framework and the brand attributes and stuff like that, in some cases, this is just my opinion, sometimes it's easier to mimic that visually. It's even harder to mimic that potentially with the way that you communicate, the language you use and the words you use, because it's so related to the personality, right? Yep. Think about all the people you know and how differently they communicate and respond, right? And so I think that's a good point too. It's the visual side and the messaging.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I think from a marketing perspective, for sure, because we do so much with our clients to get the messaging right, and it's just so much of the messaging is part of the brand identity. And a lot of times we do just think about brand as being like design elements and the way it looks. But absolutely, it's like if it's spoken of in the wrong way, then I mean, this is
like,
what
I don't know what it is. I just don't. The brand wouldn't
right.
speak that way. Wouldn't use that tone, and even if it's subtle, right? It's a little bit off. If it could be 2 or 5 degrees off, eventually that's going to be pretty far off, right? Pretty far away.
I think that's why a lot of bigger brands, if they do use multiple partners, they're usually working with agencies that understand all that stuff, plus an internal team that really guards the message. Yeah. Which kind of leads us to our next one. Okay, so like the pros and cons of hiring an agency for content production. So I guess we can speak, I mean, obviously the pros of hiring us, there's just endless pros because we're just great. But, maybe let's talk about the cons of hiring other people. So like, I'll just, kind of I don't know, I'm just being funny, but I have heard and clients that have hired us, there's just the cost of not hiring a great agency partner, which I think we're going to talk more in another episode about our model for working with, being an agency partner, working with companies and how we try to bring transparency to the relationship. But some of the cons can be around that, like retainer model or the black hole of like hours and that kind of thing, and just cost. So that's kind of like, for me, I guess, probably the biggest con would be the investment in the relationship if you're not sure that that agency is the right fit for you. Mm-hmm. Taking that step, a company taking that step for the first time can be a lot. And we see that when we start to work with clients. They often are like, well, let's do a couple projects and then we'll figure out if we want to go into like a long-term relationship. Yeah. Let's date a little bit first, because it is such an investment. What are your thoughts on the cons?
Yeah. Well, I guess there's a couple different types within that, right? There's the agency of record, which does everything. Mm-hmm. So you've got, they can do all the digital marketing, your email, your SEO, your print design, and also produce all your content, right? So that brings some benefits and cons. It's a much bigger investment. So you're risking everything to that one agency. And oftentimes it can be, if they're doing too much, then there's a good chance they're not great at all of it, right? And so they might have certain things that they're really good at, but they're kind of also just doing the other stuff. And so there is a con to that, it's putting all your eggs in one basket and saying like, we're trusting you with everything, right? And then you start to lose a little bit of the identity and the creativity, because again, you're, instead of just having one internal team, you have like one external team. In some cases that can be great. If it's a really good partnership, it can be a beautiful thing, right? They can deliver great work, and they can kind of apply the skill sets to things that they might not have done before. And we've done that in the past, extended kind of our services to things that are ancillary. Like, yeah, we haven't technically done that, but we can understand the messaging, the design, we'll just apply it in a different way. That makes sense. But then there's also the model where you've got, you might have a couple agencies that are working together, but you have one production agency, and then they're providing content to another agency, like a placement agency. So it's a little bit different than the previous model, which was you've got lots of different agencies. But in terms of the downsides, the benefits of that kind of model where you're outsourcing your content production there's a lot. You get, a lot more efficiency, a lot more creativity, a lot more flexibility and scalability. So you don't have to absorb the fact that your content needs might change and you've got a new thing you want to do. You need to bring in a specialized skill set. You want to do like an animated thing that you haven't really done before. Guess what? You can just hand it over, right? Mm-hmm. And if you've got a good relationship, that really helps. The downside is there's not necessarily, it's just things you have to watch out for. You have to make sure that you really understand the brand really well and know what you want. Because if you're paying somebody and you're giving them content and you're not giving them good direction, then your agency is going to produce stuff that kind of matches what you provided to them, which is average or below average. Mm-hmm. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that you have to make sure that you're ready, because you have to do your part to make sure that your partner, whoever that is, has all of the tools and resources and information they need to deliver on your behalf. And that's, I think, where some of the relationship can break down, is the expectation that I just have to hire an agency to take this completely off my plate. I can focus on other things. It doesn't really work. So, because the agency is not going to be in there all the meetings, they're not going to understand your brand as much. It's going to be, you need kind of that partnership. So It's not that it's a bad thing. I just think there's certain things you have to have in place or it's not going to be successful.
Yeah. Well, and I do think if you're going to do this, you do have to find a partner that understands your business. Mm-hmm. Because I think this has kind of been my critique of agencies for a long time, is that it's, in the past, it was always driven by like creative, and it can still be that way. Like with certain agencies, it's like, it's all about the creative. It's all about the ideas. It's all about like, and those things can be motivated by business goals. Like, that's fine. That whatever the KPIs are, attach those to the creative. But a lot of times in like a creative agency, it's like, it is about ideas and like, well, what's this happening out there? Right. And you can see this, like when you see an ad or you see a creative thing, it just misses the mark. And you're just like, what were they thinking when they did that? But then sometimes you see something like super creative and you're like, that is like so awesome. It just like draws you in. Mm-hmm. You're like, I just want to have something to do with that brand. And so I'm not saying, being driven by creative is bad necessarily, but I think you have to find a partner who understands like your business objectives first. Like, this is what we're trying to do, understands the audiences, isn't 100% driven by creative, but uses creative as a tool.
Right.
And by creative, I mean, I'm just saying that in like a general term, because creative is like what it's like the thing that the vehicle we use to create content.
Yeah.
So what do you have any take on that?
No, I think it's great. I think ultimately, you should, if you're hiring an agency, you should be looking at them as like a business partner who also happens to do fill in the blank, right? So like you need a business partner that creates content. You need a business partner that does search engine optimization for you. Because if they're, and you can tell by the questions that they ask, right? If they jump right to like, okay, what kind of style and theme and distribution channel and how long are the deliverables? Like that's your first conversation with them. Like you probably are not that's not a business partner. You need someone who's like, okay, well, who's your audience, and explain the sales process and how people make decisions about working with you or not working with you. And tell me about your brand. Like, what are the characteristics of it? Like, those are the kind of things, because that means that they're actually thinking about how what their work does, what they're doing impacts your business. Versus like what you were saying is like, they're just going to kind of take a little bit of direction and kind of work in their own way to try to create stuff that they think is really, really good. And they hope it meets the business goals, but they might not know what the business goals and objectives are as much. So it's more like you're hiring business consultants who also happen to be experts at production.
Yeah. And I've seen this before with other production companies. Is it sometimes a client's needs can be seen as a way to build your reel and be like, oh, this is really cool. Like this would be an awesome idea.
Yeah.
This, how awesome that I've always wanted to do this, or we should use this cool camera. We should use this piece of technology, or this new thing's out and we can do this. And then all of a sudden it's like the creative, even from a production standpoint, is driving, and it can be misaligned.
Yeah.
And then you end up spending a bunch of money and it misses the mark. And it's like, everyone gets hyped about it because like, oh, that is really cool. And then maybe it just doesn't deliver.
Yeah.
You just don't get the results. And just to brag on us a little bit and why we're a good agency partner. One of the things is this is like kind of an indirect, but I was thinking about some of these things. This kind of came to my mind is that our company, we have the DNA of a production company, we came from production, even though we've evolved very quickly after starting, as you talked about in a previous episode, into being a marketing company, a story-driven marketing agency, I guess you could say. But one of the things I wanted to do from the beginning was like, I don't want to just be a production company. I don't want to behave like a production company. Even though a lot of our team comes from production, we've actually structured our company more like a corporation. So we aren't structured like, we have elements of our company that are structured like a normal agency. And then we have elements of our company that are structured like a production company. But overall, the overarching way that we think about our teams and our business is like a much bigger corporation. It's like we have like our department structures, our department heads, our team leads, our reporting structure. It's like, and I feel like it's a very kind of, I don't want to say strange because that sounds negative, but like for a company like ours, unique. I like that. Or as you say, Brian's catchword, interesting.
Oh yeah.
That can be good or bad.
Correct.
It's just interesting. Yeah. It's an interesting way that I've kind of inadvertently like chosen to do it that way, but I feel like it helps us understand our customers better. Cause like we mirror a lot of like what we see out there with the organizations that we work with. I feel like our team does a really good job of thinking like a bigger company, and not just like, oh yeah, we're a production company or we're a creative agency. I feel like we think a little bit more like a bigger organization, but and I do feel like in a strange way, it does help us understand our company, helps our team understand our clients' business goals, because we talk a lot about the business stuff with our teams. And like we are always driven by like our own internal KPIs. And I feel like that helps our teams understand our clients better.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Do you have any other thoughts on this as we wrap this this episode up?
I think just in terms of thinking through how you're going to make the decision about doing this. I think that just remember that not all content is created equal or has equal value. So I'm a fan of the hybrid model because I've run an internal team. And so I do see the value of having a staff of some level. You have to understand the downsides and the risks of, people leaving and not getting the creativity that you want. And so you have to understand what to expect from your internal team, whether it's like one person or 20 people. So just to make really strategic decisions about what you want to own as a brand and then what you want to outsource. And so making those decisions and understanding the types of work that you want and then the type of partner that you want to have in there, right? To know kind of the situation. So, a lot of times internal teams can produce a lot of content. Not that blogs are easy to produce, but a lot of times you can find somebody that's a good writer who can write good blog content, because a lot about it is about the volume of it, but also getting your point of view out there and things like that. And the actual act of writing isn't that complicated. You can get someone to do that. You can get somebody who understands social media and can do kind of static images on social to celebrate community events, things like that. Some of those things you can certainly outsource to an agency, but that's really expensive to do that. So owning some of the content and then partnering with an agency and just making sure that you have shared content calendars, you've got strategic alignment, right? So they really understand they're asking the right questions, and knowing kind of what you're hiring them to do, because an agency is going to be able to do the higher production value stuff like the ads and the social campaigns that require kind of a little bit more innovation and kind of thinking outside the box in terms of what they brought with the other clients, and additional skill sets you're not going to have internally, right? So just kind of thinking about what do you want to own internally, what resources do you have, and being clear with your expectations. Because if you budget just for an internal team, you're going to get burnt because you're going to need to outsource some stuff. So you just have to go into it knowing I'm going to have an internal budget and then I'm going to have an outsourced budget. And there it can be like a sliding scale of what makes sense in terms of where that a line goes. So
cool. So it seems like it, in summary, it just depends on your organization, the structure of it, the size of it, the makeup, what the goals are.
Yeah.
What's important, but in general, you need to consider all the things, you just mentioned.
Yeah.
So, okay, cool. Well, I feel like that's it for this episode, unless you've got anything else, but, yeah, in general, I think this was good. Hopefully, you guys that are listening would find this helpful. And as always, if you enjoy this and you want to hear us talk about more stuff in the future, we're going to be bringing on clients. We're going to bring in some folks from our staff to do a little bit of a behind the scenes look on things. But if you're enjoying this, go ahead and subscribe, share it with a friend, and we'll see you next time.